All right, good morning, everybody. Friday edition of Human Anatomy. Welcome. Hope everyone is doing well. Today we have our quiz on the nervous system, and then we're going to launch into spending about a day and a half or so on the second of our unit on ideological awareness. We started at the beginning of this class, you had a survey. We're going to talk about healthcare disparities a little bit today after your quiz. In advance of class today, the only thing on your course program was just information about this quiz, or excuse me, class program was information about this quiz and then the articles associated with the human anatomy in the news. So today's agenda is pretty straightforward. You came into class knowing about the quiz, and I've got a short video for you about the nervous system and how we can control it in interesting ways. And that's I think it's about 6 minutes long. And then I have a short lecture kind of launching us into a reading assignment you'll have over the weekend, looking at factors that influence who and how people have access to healthcare. And offer some reminders on your way out. And of course, I've got a new Venn diagram. I spent too much time searching for a good Venn diagram yesterday. And I'll be honest, the result is only marginal. It's okay. It's not the best. Still something to look forward to. So before we launch into your quiz, what questions do you have? Okay, I will pass out the quizzes. You'll have 20 minutes to take it. It's closed book, closed note. Here's what I'd like to do. When you're finished with the quiz, please go ahead and just kind of turn it sideways, face down, and just put it in front of your desk like this. And then at that point, if you're done and want to look at your phone and bide some time, that's fine, but don't pick it up again, because then you see without answers or whatever. What I'd like to avoid is people kind of coming and delivering their quizzes and everything while others are taking the quiz. It just gets really kind of distracting. So let's keep that down to a minimum. If you want to put your quiz like this when you're done and just pull out your phone a little bit, that's totally fine. I know it's really hard to sit for 5 minutes and not look at your phone, or wait in the grocery line and not look at your phone, or look at the traffic light and not look at your phone. It's another story for another day, but for today, once you're done with your quiz, you can just do that. Sound okay? Cool, everything away. I'll pass these out and I will start the timer. Actually, I'll just give you some here and pass it out.
That's not good. It really is. I'm getting my way.
One other thing to notice about that was that they're picking up the signal from Sam's left arm and sending it to Miguel's right arm, right? And he happened to be sending it to the same nerve. He was picking it up from Sam's ulnar nerve and stimulating Miguel's ulnar nerve. What shows you, what's important to note is it doesn't have to be the same thing. He could have taken that signal and stimulated his leg or his toes or his face or whatever. And because it's just an electrical signal, it's just an electrical impulse. it doesn't necessarily have to be that same part of the body as he kind of took the signal. Cool demonstration, thought you'd enjoy that. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more. That was my slide for that. I'm going to transition. Actually, this will be perfect amount of time. Rick, go ahead.
Would it be same like people do it, like if you're simulating like a quad, like a leg extension, would you have to use like a more powerful signal since like flexing your hand is a little bit less muscle work than extending the leg?
That's a really good question. And what the way nerves work is that an action potential is an action potential is an action potential. And what they all have the same amount of voltage, the same amount of electrical strength. The difference is how rapidly they're stimulated and how many of them get stimulated. So to answer your question, if you're stimulating the motor units in your leg, that's going to require more of those motor units to be stimulated. So you'd either have to, I don't know exactly how to work with the setup. You'd either have to put more of these on there to stimulate more of those nerves, or you'd have to stimulate it in kind of a different way. But it would take a greater contraction force to do that. Yeah, that's a good thought. Yeah, I don't know exactly how that worked, but it would have to be a little bit different. Sorry, go ahead.
So when the message from Sam's arm to Miguel's right arm, so is it going up through the brain spinal cord and then coming back down so they don't contract his hand? Like, it's like how the sensory receptors are going to respond. Are like the sensory receptors responding to what Sam is doing, or is it more
Right. That's a really good question. It doesn't involve the sensory neurons at all. All it's doing is stimulating this motor neuron from here down. And so that signal is never going to his brain directly anyway. Now, granted, there's sensory neurons in his hand that after this happens are sending a signal back to his brain and said, hey, buddy, your hand's contracting, right? But in this sense, that signal is circumventing Miguel's brain and just going right to his arm to stimulate that muscle. Yep, and what he's trying to do here anyway is just stimulate specifically that one motor neuron, or that one, yeah, we'll say this one motor neuron to stimulate it to contract. Good question. Other questions? Cool. All right, let's totally transition, talk about something else. This is the second of the third kind of short units we have on kind of, what do I want to say, the relationship between things that are going on in the world and human health and human anatomy, right? And so today I want to talk a little bit about healthcare disparities among people with historically excluded identities. And I'm going to walk through some examples of this, and then we're going to have a reading assignment over the weekend, and we're going to do an activity on Monday about this. I want to start off with a disclaimer that this is not my area of expertise. There's some information here, but there's entire courses taught on, I think actually the course that's taught right after this class in this room. Some of you are in that class, right? Is that cover topics related to this? Healthcare, what drives disparities in healthcare among people, and kind of the social interaction between social factors and healthcare and that kind of thing. Am I mistaken, or is that kind of part of what's in that class? It is. Okay, cool. Thank you. So there's entire classes here taught on this subject. So I don't want to give the illusion that we're going to, learn a whole, like basically master the subject in a day and a half. But with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. So in a report from 2020 defines a health disparity as a particular type of health difference that is closely linked with social, economic, and or environmental disadvantage. In other words, because you are in a certain social group, a certain economic group, or you're exposed to a certain environment, your health outcomes are going to be potentially poorer because of those factors, rather than any factor intrinsic to your own biology, right? Or yeah, directly related to your biology. And so what's important to note here is that these disparities, and this is a quote from this study, they're adversely affecting groups of people who have systemically experienced greater obstacles. Let me pause for 1 second and just set up my screen here. Greater obstacles to health based on their racial or ethnic group, religion, socioeconomic status, gender, age, mental health, cognitive, sensory, or physical disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, geographic location, or other characteristics that have been historically linked to discrimination, right? So a whole bunch of different factors can play into this. So we're going to look at a few in a little more detail. the important thing here, and I've highlighted a lot of this in yellow, and I'm going to come back to this over and over again, is that what we're talking about here is the product of systems and structures in society, in the healthcare system, in the way people have access to information about healthcare, et cetera. It's not a matter of like one person being like, I don't want to provide healthcare to this group or something like that. Is that the issues we're talking about are large societal structural issues that have been in place for a long time and that lead to these more negative outcomes for folks that are associated with one or more of these groups. I want to emphasize too that these are all intersectional, that you can fall into many of these categories simultaneously. It's not like you have to be one or the other. Sound good so far? Sweet. So I want to just show some examples from different studies. So this is the share of adults, excluding elderly folks, adults who did not see a doctor in the past year because of cost. And what you can see here is that the percentage, this percentage varies greatly according to race here. So specifically, folks that identify as Hispanic are much less likely to see a doctor, for example, than folks that identify as Asian. And you can see the other proportions there. And so based on which of these ethnic or racial categories you fall into, that's going to influence how often you can see a doctor because of the financial burden of going to see a doctor, right? And so we can think about then what is systematically occurring in the healthcare system that is causing these high medical costs, and specifically high costs associated with seeing a doctor, and how that might limit folks from being able to see a doctor. And there's a couple of things at play there. There's the interplay of income, of course, and the interplay of the cost of seeing a doctor. If you don't make a lot of money, but going to see a doctor is really cheap, then you can go see a doctor. If going to a doctor is really expensive, but you're wealthy and make a lot of money, well, then you can go to a doctor, right? So it's that interplay of both the cost of seeing a doctor as well as socioeconomic status. Second example I want to talk about is uninsured rates. So if you don't have, this is folks obviously that don't have health insurance, which is provides a huge access in terms of cost to healthcare. And you can see here, again, breaking this down by race across years, that there was a big decline in folks that were uninsured. This was around the time, this has decreased greatly because of some of the new government policies around healthcare, but you can still see pretty large disparities in here around folks that are uninsured. So if you're, the higher number here represents the percentage of people from those groups that don't have health insurance. And again, we can think about if you don't have health insurance, it's harder to go see a doctor because you don't have access to the doctor. It costs more money, et cetera, et cetera. Like, why do we have a system in place where that insurance is limited to certain folks? And what we have in the US is a kind of crazy healthcare system that is not found anywhere else in the world that I can think of off the top of my head anyway. And that's that healthcare is tied to your employment. Like it's really kind of weird. Like, imagine if your car insurance was tied to where you worked, and if you lost your job, all of a sudden you didn't have car insurance anymore, or whatever other kind of insurance. Like, there's no, it's a weird, complicated story about how that came to be about 70, 80 years ago, but there's nowhere else in the world. People think it's super weird that like our health insurance is tied to where we work, rather than just be like something we can get from the government or purchase on our own. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
So these numbers are based on just the United States, not.
Oh, yeah, thank you for saying that. Everything we're going to talk about here is focusing on the US. I meant to say that at the beginning. Yeah, there's obviously lots of other global factors and issues here. So we're going to focus basically entirely on the US here. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I meant to say that at the beginning. So otherwise you get a whole other, so, yeah. Yeah, that would be very different if we were looking at these numbers in a country with universal healthcare, like the UK or France or something. Cool. All right, one other one I want to look at. So this is maternal mortality rate. So this is the number of, per 100,000 births, the number of women that die during childbirth. And this number is about 13 per 100,000 for women identifying as white, and about 41 per 100,000. So what, more than 3 times more risk factor for women identifying as Black. And again, we want to think about what is the systemic structure that is treating these women differently and putting them at different risk when they are giving birth. And finally, here's one more, as we're thinking about these structures, we want to think not only about healthcare, but about how health research and information about healthcare is formulated. So a good example here is from a report that less than 10% of cancer patients enrolled in clinical trials. So this is a chance where you can both experience new treatments and where doctors get information about how those new treatments work. Less than 10% of the folks involved with that identified as racial or ethnic minorities. And that's problematic for a couple of reasons. One is that that means that these new treatments are less available to folks in these racial or ethnic categories, but it also means that the information that scientists are getting about how well a treatment works is based on mostly white folks, right? And so maybe some treatments might work differently in different people with different genetic backgrounds, but we're not going to know that or have that information if we're only enrolling people from one ethnic or racial group in those studies, right? So this is problematic in a number of different ways. And again, we want to think systematically, why is that happening? Why is this only available or being offered or potentially even accepted by folks in these in certain racial categories? Go ahead, question.
This may be answered later, but does this have to, the people who enroll in the enrollment process, does that cost like a lot of money and have to do with financial?
It can depend on the treatment and the situation, right? So that can vary a lot. There's not one answer to that, but that could certainly be a factor that would be limiting as well. This could definitely tie into some of the socioeconomic factors that we looked at earlier. Yeah, all of these things, as I mentioned, it's all intersection. All of these factors are interplaying with each other. It's super important to remember. I'm glad you said that. I think this is one last example here. Nope, where are we? Is this my last example? Yep, I think this is my last example here. This also extends to folks in the LGBTQ plus community, right? And so this is an example. This is a little bit of a difficult to read figure. So this is barriers to accessing healthcare. So this is the percentage of people who reported mistreatment by doctors or healthcare providers because of their gender identity. And so if you are transgender, you can see the different ways that doctors have mistreated you or made you uncomfortable, right? And you can see this ranges up to over like 25% of a doctor visibly uncomfortable. Like that's a huge percentage. If a quarter of the time you're going to the doctor and the doctor is visibly uncomfortable, that's a problem. And this is for transgender folks here in the US. And if you're non-white and transgender, you can see all of those proportions are higher in every category as well. And so we see discrimination based on sexuality. We see discrimination for transgender folks. And again, we want to think about what is the structure in place that's doing that? Why are doctors not better trained for these to treat everybody equitably? Why is access to different treatments limited to folks that identify in certain gender or sexual identity categories? Again, bringing it back to the bigger structure. So now that everyone, and I've cheered you up on your Friday afternoon or Friday morning, what we want to note here is that the Centers for Disease Control also notes that all of these differences are preventable. In other words, there's systemic structures in place that create these problems, but we can stop them, right? And it's not, I'm not saying it's like easy because these are large societal structures in place that have caused these things, but they're not, it's not inevitable. And what I want us to think about a little bit is what those potential solutions could look like. So what you're going to do is over the weekend, you are going to read one of 3 articles, and these articles are up in Blackboard. And let's see. Oh, this says in groups. We're not going to work in groups. I put 3 up that are kind of focused in 3 different areas, and you can pick whichever one you're interested in. I didn't want to pigeonhole you because you might have a different specific interest that you wanted to learn about. So you can pick which of the 3 articles. And what I want you to think about as you're reading these is what are the sources of these healthcare disparities? What are the effects of those disparities? And then what are strategies that could be used to mitigate that? Now, you're not healthcare experts. We're not going to solve the world's problems in this class, but thinking about these things on a larger term, especially those of you that are thinking about careers in health sciences, I think is really important to plant some of those seeds and to kind of consciously consider some of these. So you'll be reading on your own. The 3 articles I picked have these titles. The first is exposures to structural racism and racial discrimination among pregnant and early postpartum Black women living in Oakland, California. So this has to do specifically with childbirth and race. The second is health disparities in COVID-19, addressing the role of social determinants of health and immune system dysfunction to turn the tide. So this is specifically COVID-19 related to factors that affect your immune system, so socioeconomic, race, and things like that. And then the third is lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender health issues, disparities, and information resources. So kind of broadly looking at access to healthcare for LGBTQ plus folks. So the assignment is pretty straightforward. What I want you to do is read one of these 3 articles. All the details are in your class program. And then you're going to create something called a concept map. Now, we could spend a lot of time describing what concepts maps are and working into that. I decided not to do that. Basically, draw a picture that shows the relationship of ideas in the article, right? I'm not going to spend a ton of time teaching the proper way to do a concept map because I don't really care. What I care about is that you're reading the article and thinking about these things. So you can draw it however you want, right? And the idea here is that you're just putting ideas together that you read in the article. And it's going to take a slightly different form for all of you, and that's great. We're going to bring these to class on Monday and we'll work on them together. So the idea is basically you're kind of making a summary of the article in graphic format. And the graphic format is words in boxes that are ideas, and then arrows between those boxes that describe those relationships. So one thing causes another, one thing leads to another, one thing can change another. All those details are in your class program. What you do is draw this and you'll upload an image to me before class on Monday, and then bring those to class on Monday as well. This is going to be worth 6 class points. It's a little bit of a longer assignment over the weekend. It's a reading and a concept map. And then we're going to do an activity in class on Monday. That'll be another 4 class points. And then, so it's 10 points total for participation. And that'll take us through, that should probably take the majority of the class time on Monday to work through this. Got a few other just quick reminders. I don't have a ticket out for you today. Just got a couple other quick reminders. Before I do, what questions do you have after the world's fastest tour of problems with the healthcare system? Tired just thinking about it. Okay, before you go, pack up, please. You got to wait for your Venn diagram too, right? Super stoked. Couple quick reminders. A week from today, your class will be in Blackboard open book exam. I will set it up. I'm going to write it. So I think it's going to take about 50 minutes. I'll give you 60 minutes in Blackboard to finish it. Those details are in your class program for Monday. So make sure you see that if you have any questions. I've said this a bunch of times. Remember, you've got April 29th on your calendar for the afternoon for the lab practical. One other announcement is I will not have open hours on Monday. It's the week, as many of you know, we're scheduling fall classes and I have to meet with all my advisees. So I kind of cancel all of my other outside of class stuff so I can make time to meet with my advisees. If you have questions about anything before class on Monday, shoot me an email. I can answer over email or figure it out, but I will not have my regular open hours on Monday. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Here is your Venn diagram for the weekend.